Right, hello. I'm Richard Bartle, and as you can see, I'm enjoying sunny Marseille here. This is my talk for the LREC, which I was supposed to be delivering live. I'm instead delivering it fairly live, as in this is not going to be edited at all, as you probably noticed from the beginning, to give you the full-on, oh God, I wish I was doing something else experience that you'd be having if you're actually in the hall with me speaking. You should be seeing a screen here with my slides on it and a little picture of me in the bottom corner, which for me is down on the right. Who knows where it is for you? So let's start then. Right. So I'm going to begin with a somewhat embarrassing admission. I should perhaps have added some editing so that I could make my face look redder than it does. So I'm not a linguist. In fact, I can't even parse the conference title. It's Language Resources and Evaluation. What's that about then? Is that about the evaluation of language resources? Or is it the resources of language and evaluation of language? Or is it maybe about two separate things that have been merged together in the past that I don't know about? Evaluation and language resources. I mean, it could be anything. I don't know what that is. But what I am, if not a linguist, is a game designer. I've been bullied into working with linguists in the past, so that's why I'm here. And what I'll be doing today is talking about some of the things about the design of games, a particular kind of game, the ones that that take information from their users in some kind of useful way. And the particular project I'm working on, DALI, is about resolving ambiguities, such as how to parse the title of the conference. This particular class of games that does this is called Games with a Purpose, or GWAPS. I'll just be calling them GWAPS mainly. They're not the same as regular kind of games you buy or make for yourself for fun, and they're not the same as serious games, which are the ones that most people think of when they're thinking about games in an academic context. Oh, here's a hamster running on a wheel. Serious games are the ones that academics usually make, because what they often really want to make are actual proper fun games, and they want to understand how to make games that are more fun than they really are, but there's no funding for fun. The problem is, of course, that it's seen as a trivial thing. It's okay to study it as a kind of a dispassionate studying of games, but actually trying to make games and figure out why they're fun is not regarded as academically respectable. So if you want to make games, you've got to have some excuse, and that excuse originally started out as being, well, let's make games for education, because education is something that people want. And we accept that, and children, they play, you know, so it's okay for that. So that's where it kind of came from. But now there's a lot more people who are interested in the use of serious games actually from a pedagogic point of view. So although originally it was like an excuse, nowadays it's not quite so much like that. Serious games, they normally develop for some teaching purpose. So there's something you want to teach people, and you get them to play a game, and playing the game teaches them something. The logic is being taught is unfun. I only have to look at my own students to be able to affirm that that is the case. Games, however, are fun. Being taught and games, therefore, should lead to fun teaching. Unfortunately, the reality is that it leads to unfun games. And that's quite predictable. The reason for it is that in a serious game, the thing that you're teaching, you're trying to teach, is the core of the game. So the game has to be about what it is you're teaching. Well, it doesn't quite have to be, as we'll see shortly, but generally it's going to be about the thing you're teaching. Now, this is by definition unfun, because if it were fun, you wouldn't need the game. The game's trying to make it a fun activity by adding game-like elements to it, or even a full-on game to it. But the problem is that if you have to teach something, that something has to be in the game, and if it's not fun, then making a game isn't going to make it fun. It's just not fun. If the subject matter is unfun and the game has that as its core mechanic, it's no surprise to anybody that it's not going to be fun. You can't make something unfun fun. But if you're teaching something, some particular things, you are okay. If you're teaching social skills or high order problem solving, then games can work. If you're trying to teach somebody to solve problems, then games are very good at solving problems. That's part of what they do anyway. So if you're if what you want to teach is aligned with what games do anyway, then that's quite easy. If you're trying to teach social skills, then a game about pretty well anything involving cooperation or so on will help do that. So again, games are pretty good for that sort of stuff. They're also very good for teaching facts. I know all the countries in Europe, not because I've sat and studied maps, but because I played so many games in Europe that I can just name all the countries, which I would do for you right now, but you wouldn't believe that I could remember them. You just think that I've got it written down on a piece of paper or on my screen or something. Well, actually, you know it's not the screen because you're seeing the shared. Well, maybe I've got another screen. So GWAPS, they aren't the same as serious games. People play GWAPS because they find the subject matter interesting. Okay, so making them play them, otherwise they won't get any marks, or bribing them by saying good things will happen if they do it. That'll also work, but generally people who play a GWAP will be playing it because they're actually interested in the subject matter, which is not usually the case with serious games. So this gives them an advantage, a large advantage over serious games. GWAPs not only could use a subject matter as their core mechanics, but they should use them, because that's why the people are playing the games in the first place. And yet we can still ask this question I asked about serious games. Why would anybody play such a game? Because if it were fun, you wouldn't need the game. And for these people, the subject matter is fun, so maybe you don't need the game. To explain what a game would buy you, I'm going to it's almost a digression here, consider what games actually are. Basically, games are any kind of play at which you can lose. So regular play, which is what children do, you get Lego blocks and they're doing things like this, that only ends when you decide to stop. Puzzles only end, so crossword puzzles, jigsaw puzzles, either when you decide to stop or when you win, when you complete it. Games will end either when you decide to stop, or if you win, or if you lose. So if you can lose, it's definitely a game. If you can win, it might be a game or it might be a puzzle. If you just keep playing till you stop, it could be a game, a puzzle, or a regular play. It's all fun and games until someone loses an eye, then it's just fun. But this doesn't mean that all games have to be fun. You can make games for many reasons, and of which fun is but one. Okay, so it's majority reason, but still. Now the thing about fun is it's a difficult concept to pin down. Some languages don't even actually have a direct translation for the English word fun. As I said, I'm not a linguist, and you lot are, so I'm at something of a disadvantage here. So I went to Google. Google's translation, English to French. This is fun. Translates to, now I've got something blocking my screen here, so I can't actually read what that says. Now I can. And so can you. C'est marrant, or something like that, I don't know. I should say it in a Yorkshire accent since I've got a Yorkshire. C'est marrant. There you go. That way I know that I'm not pronouncing it correctly. But if you put that in to Google and translate it from French to English, it comes out as "this is funny." So fun and funny aren't the same thing. If you type "this game is fun" into Google's Translate, it comes out at "ce jeu est amusant" or "ce jeu est amusant." But if you also put in "this game is amusing," it comes out as "ce jeu est amusant," which isn't the same thing as saying it's fun. Amusing and fun aren't the same concepts. So, as I said, it's hard to pin this down. Also, in English, the word fun has got two opposites. At least it has amongst games players. Amongst the regular population, no fun is quite well known, but unfun's not quite so. It's not really used a lot. Game designers will use both, though, unfun and no fun. There is a distinction. You see, unfun is when something is just too hard. You're making no progress. You keep trying it. You get frustrated. Serious games are always trying to teach something that's beyond the player's current ability, because they're trying to teach them something. So if they already knew it, they would need to teach it. So they're trying to teach some skill beyond their abilities, and that's why they're always unfun, because they're always too hard. If they're easy enough, then you wouldn't need to be pushing the games anyway, as I said it before. So no fun is the other opposite of fun, and that's when something's too easy for you, and that's usually manifested as boredom. So fun falls in this little sweet spot that's in between them. Unfun, fun, no fun. Now, those of you who are been looking at games and fun might be aware of a concept called flow. And this description of fun that I've just given looks quite a lot like the definition of flow, but it isn't. I mean, basically it's challenge and skills like flow is, and there's a bit in the middle which I've labelled fun, but every other graph would have flow on it. It's got boredom and frustration as below and above the line of flow, and which I pointed out as being unfun and no fun. So this is flow, as in Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's famous work on the subject. The thing is that this slope is different for each person. Some people like games with a high degree of challenge, that they lose many times, they lose 20 times in a row and then win, then they like that game. Other people like games which are a lot easier. They're just there to relax, they want to play a game and they want to have a bit of a challenge, but something that most of the time, almost always, they'll overcome. The thing is that what I've just described could be the same person. It could be the same person at different times. Sometimes you like a game that's fun like this, sometimes you like a game that's fun like that. Sometimes you might start off with a game that's that you're enjoying, and it gets a bit too easy or a bit too hard, so you can stop playing and then you come back again a bit later, another day, and continue it when you're in the right frame of mind. So the slope changes depending on which on your mood, on the game, on what you're finding interesting, on all sorts of things. Also, you don't have to be in flow to have fun, which is a big mistake many people coming at game design from outside of games make. Flow, it might be sufficient for fun, but isn't necessary for fun. Now, fun is an intrinsic reward for play. Autotelic is the word that's been around since Gary Allen Fine or something like that, I think, popularised it in the early 80s. A game is fun because it's fun in and of itself. You play the game, playing the game is itself fun. That is the reward, that is why you are playing the game. You're not playing it because someone's paying you, you're not playing it because someone's standing with a gun next to your head saying play the game. You're playing it because it's fun, and that's intrinsic. Games will also employ extrinsic rewards, which are rewards that are not from the mere joy of playing the game, but are rewarding you outside of that. And this is perfectly fine, unless the extrinsic rewards come to dominate. Now, extrinsic rewards can be, I promise myself a bar of chocolate if I do this, or they could be, there's a really cool animation if I do this, and oh, there it is. These are extrinsic rewards. You're doing it for the reward, not for the fun of doing it. Now, when games aren't intrinsically fun, which is the case for serious games, players have to be bribed, induced to play by use of external rewards. You could, in theory, use external punishments. Play the game, otherwise I'm going to lock you up and take away your liberty. And kind of know about that at the moment. Anyway, the technical term that game designers use when describing these extrinsic rewards, which we're attempting to use to induce players to do things that they wouldn't do normally, the technical term is cheap psychological tricks. That's pretty well what they are, so that's what we call them. Now, designers are in general very against using cheap psychological tricks. The reason is because they want people to play their games because the games are fun. They don't want them to play the games through some kind of mind control. That the designer is trying to say something to the players, and the players are associating that with the fun, or they're playing because of the fun and the message is coming with it. But what they don't want is to have people playing the game just because you've given them some kind of operant conditioning and hooked them into it. I mean, that's, well, it's immoral, if nothing else. Designers will therefore avoid serious games because they don't want to be designing games for people that are not going to be enjoying the game, they're not going to have it fun, and they're going to have to wield out cheap psychological tricks in order to make them continue to play for long enough that they might conceivably learn that which is being taught. They absolutely loathe most gamification, because gamification takes the actual gameplay away and replaces it just by these cheap psychological tricks, or the trappings of them, to try and make something that isn't a game have the benefits of being a game without being a game, which is anathema to most game designers. Now, the thing is, GWAPS are intrinsically fun. So the people playing the GWAPS are playing them because they find them the content fun. And this means that designers have no philosophical objections to designing GWAPS, which is a big advantage that GWAPS have over serious games. Most game designers will design GWAPS if, well, not if asked, but if it's proposed to them. They won't have an objection to it. They will have objections to designing serious games, and they will not touch gamification except to expose it as the sham it is. And I'd say that, unfortunately, since my work seems to be at the heart of gamification. Oh well, never mind. The question then: why is a game about an activity sometimes better than the activity alone? This is what I asked before I went on that short, almost digression, explaining why games are fun. So, why is a game about an activity sometimes better than the activity? Well, okay, so games can do things for players that you get that can help them get over humps that they might have otherwise. I didn't explain that very well. Fortunately, I have a slide in front of me which does explain it well. So what games can do for a player is they can give them a direction and an overall goal. So rather than exploring a topic in an aimless fashion, they can create a path or create an end goal. You can find your own path, so that they allow you to develop in a way that you might not have done if you were trying to do it without this without the goal. They can structure what you're learning, so that you get more of the fun parts, or to make it that the things that are fun are highlighted as being fun. They're shown up. There's a light shone on them to say, "Yeah, this really was quite fun, wasn't it?" The things that aren't fun, which you might be doing in a non-game context, games can provide tools or other activities that make them go away. So you don't have to seek a particular text which is interesting in order to do something with it. A game can provide you with that text. They also allow you to match the level of difficulty that you want right now with your skills and other preferences. So if you like reading text that's about, I don't know, hard-boiled 1940s detectives, then those could be provided, and the different levels of difficulty that you want can be matched to your current needs. Games can do all of these, and they're not really. The first one's about a direction is probably something you get from games anyway. The other things they're incidental. Games can give you those, but that's not what games are about. Games are mainly about the gameplay attempting to form a strategy to solve a goal. Now, games can also amplify the fun at key moments. So here they give you little rewards like jaunty music or fancy little animations. They can work here. They're only short. It's called juiciness. It's not a term I really use. It came out maybe 15, something like that, years ago, but I've been designing games longer than that, so I don't really call it that. But if you see juiciness mentioned, that's what it refers to, a short extrinsic reward in order to emphasize something else. So not only did you defeat the enemy, but you also get this. Dun, 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 dun. I hope this doesn't get banned because I've just quoted some music I didn't know about. Oh well. It can help the player be accepted, what they do, and be recognised. So if you're doing something which other people think is a bit weird, like reading stories and identifying an aphora, what the game can do is help you feel accepted. The thing is, I'm struggling here is because game designers have a word for this, and the word is validation. But the trouble is that in a linguistics context, validation means something completely different. It means checking that the task that they've been done and the judgments that the players are given are correct. But from a game designer's point of view, we'd call validation what it is you get when the game says that what you're doing is correct, or that what you're doing is right or worthwhile. So a player feels validated when the game rewards them for doing something, or when what they've done is rewarded. Let's put it that way. You can lengthen or shorten the player's involvement. If they've only got 10 minutes, then you don't want to be giving them War and Peace to read. In fact, you probably don't want to be giving War and Peace to read anyway. So this is in parallel with levels of difficulty. So they might want something that's very challenging but only quite short, or something that's very challenging and quite long. It's up to them. These are separate things, and games can help do that. They can help break tasks up into subtasks by having sub-goals. And they can also help hold the player's hands through the parts that aren't particularly fun, they're unfun, like the tutorials, things like that. They can help them through that, reassuring them that what they're going to be doing will be fun in the long term. So there's a number of things that games can do that you don't get if you just give people an activity straight. Now, this is how regular games, what people think of the games, work. For example, with Tetris, you might like what's essentially a knapsack packing problem. They're called, or at least they used to be called when I was a student last century. But if there's a game built around it, it's somehow more fun than if you're just trying to do it on your own. Now, GWAPS are pretty well regular games that co-opt what the player's doing, the activity of the game, to the ends of the GWAP designer, or well, not the GWAP developer. So they're making a regular game about a perhaps unusual topic, and then going to be leveraging what the players do in there to produce useful information. So it's a bit like a hamster. So those little hamsters are little guys. They love running around in hamster wheels, and that's what they do. They just love it. Now a regular game is saying, here you go, little hamster guy. Just keep running, little buddy. You know, you'll be fine. Just keep going. It's great. We've given you all this. And the GWAP is exactly the same. Keep running, little buddy. Just keep going. Ignore the dynamo we've put in the axle that you're actually using to generate power, but you're having the same fun. It doesn't matter to you that we're taking some power off it, or maybe it does. Maybe that's why you're doing it, for the benefit of mankind, you little generous hamster. So GWAPs are like regular games which siphon off some core activity which they can then use for some purpose, hence games with a purpose. So if GWAPs are regular games and game designers have no objections to them, then problem solved. Unfortunately, no. You see, what we've got here is a distinction between art and craft. Game design is an art form. It does say design, which is typically a craft form. So why is game design an art and not a craft? Well, because we already had artists, game artists, as in the ones who create all the artwork, the pictures and the animation. So we have a different name, and the name's used designers. But game design is actually an art form. Game designers are creative people. Through their gameplay, they're trying to say something to the player. Now, why? See, creative people have many possible outlets for their creativity. They could write poems, they could write music, they could sing, they could dance, they could sculpt, they could design buildings, they can cook. I mean, there's all sorts of things you can do as a creative outlet. And many game designers do those things. There are many game designers who write novels, or who perform music, who paint. They do have these other outlets, but when they're designing games, what they're doing is they're trying to say something to the player of the games, or players of the games, through the gameplay. The particular thing they want to say has to be said through gameplay. It can't be said through anything else. It doesn't matter how good you are at interpretive dance. You can't say what you want to say through any other medium other than gameplay. That's why the game designers are designing games. Now, in a design of a GWAP, they're not actually trying to say anything to the players. So they've got no objection to them, but they're not trying to say anything to it. And that's because the game's trying to leverage the players, their activities, to some overall end. And game designers, yeah, they can do that, but what they want to do is to say something, to change the lives of the players in some way. It's as if someone asks you to write a manual, something like that. When you're a novelist, yeah, you can write a manual. It'll probably be a very good manual, but it doesn't really say anything to the players other than how to construct an IKEA table. Actually, manuals for those would be quite useful. So it's not just a case of the designer wants to say something and, well, if I can't say it, I'm not going to. The thing is that if you've got something to say as a designer, then it actually helps you in your game design. It helps the designer to make decisions. If you're faced with a white noise of possible decisions that you could make, then yes, you can go through it methodically, you can go through it in an engineering fashion, but if you know you're trying to say something, that gives you a path through. Things that you could have done, you won't say, you won't even necessarily think of saying, because they're irrelevant to the task that you want to say. They're irrelevant to your message. And this means that the game designs that you get when people are trying to say something are far more coherent, they're stronger. The games are much better than if people are just trying to solve them in a straight puzzle solving engineering approach. So games which are about, in which the designers are expressing things, are largely going to be better games than ones where they're not. To give you the context here, GWAPS are situated between serious games and commercial games on a large spectrum. This is what the full spectrum of interests looks like. So at one end you've got the serious games. The only people interested in serious games are the stakeholders, the people who funded the manufacturing of the serious game or who wrote it themselves to be a serious game. GWAPS are interested to the stakeholders and to players. The players because they are playing the game because they're interested in the subject matter. Regular commercial games, right in the middle, they're of interest to the stakeholders and to the players. They're also interesting to the designer because the designer gets to say things through them. Then we get to indie games. These are games with no stakeholders. No one's funding them. They're made out of the sweat of the designers. These are interesting to the players. Players like indie games. The designers, of course, the reason they're indie games is because the designers doesn't want to have to dance to the tune of the commercial people, or can't even get the funds to do it. So in independent games, indie games as we call them, they're interesting to the players and the designers. And then you get at the far end, you get these self-conscious art games, where the designer's written something to say something in an arty fashion deliberately. Those are only interesting to the designer. Players don't find them interesting. You might find some academics who find them interesting, but they're not going to play them, heaven forfend. So this is the spectrum. So GWAPS are interesting to stakeholders and players, but not so much to designers. All is not lost though, because they do appeal to them as an intellectual exercise. So a designer might design a GWAP because they're themselves interested in the subject matter as a player or as an outside observer. They might do it because it presents an interesting problem that they want to see if they can solve. Another thing is that designers are quite insatiable when it comes to knowledge. Designers will seek out new knowledge, even if it's irrelevant. They can become very interested in particular things, and if you're lucky and get one who's interested in your purpose, then they will go for that game with a purpose. I once had a student who was revising for his exams, and he came up to me, he was a Greek student, and he said, "How am I ever going to be a game designer? I'm supposed to be revising for my final exams, and I've just spent the past few days looking up the inner workings of the Palestine Liberation Organization in the 1970s. I'm not Palestinian. I'm not Jewish. I'm just ordinary Greek, and I've just wasted all this time. How can I be a game designer?" And I told him that when I was writing up my PhD, I spent a week looking at pagodas when I should have been writing up my thesis. The thing is, when you're a game designer, that's just what happens. That he thought that he wasn't a game designer because he'd done that. That pretty well qualified him to be a game designer. Anyway, moving on. So, how do you start designing a game with a purpose at GWAP? Well, the number one rule of game design is know your players. There is a number 0 rule, which is you need to know what you want to say, but since we're not actually saying anything for GWAPS, we don't need the rule number 0. So know your players. If you know who's going to play the game, you can much better design the game for those players. Now for GWAPS, what you're trying to do is to build an activity around something that the players want to do anyway, so that's really a lot of your work done there. Because everybody likes the same thing, that should make it easier. However, easier isn't the same thing as easy. See, players may like the same activity, but they may not like it for the same reasons. The biggest mistake that non-designers make when they're designing games is to make games that they personally will find fun. Most people who are transitioning from being a player to being a designer will do it because they're playing some game and the designer's done it wrong, and the designer should have done it like this, and then so they do it like this because then they personally will find it fun. Now, okay, so there is an advantage to this in that at least one person's going to find your game fun, you. But game designers should be making games that people will find fun. For game designers, designing the game is the fun, not the playing of the game. Now, in trying to explain this to non-designers, way back in 1996, I published a paper based on some work I'd done back in 1990, 91, that sort of period. People were creating games. The games they were creating were games that they themselves wanted to play, and I wanted to say to these people, no, you should be creating games that people want to play, because if you do ones that just you want to play, you're not going to get the full spectrum of players that you want. And furthermore, having different types of player play your game, they support each other and lead to a better game in the long term. Now, this is ultimately why I've been invited to give this talk, and the fact that I'm cheap. So my paper showed that for the games that we now call massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or MMOs for even shorter than MMORPGs, you could categorize people by the activities that they found to be fun. I found that there were 4 player types. These were Achiever, Explorer, Socializer and Killer. And I figured out these from looking at players' expressions of why they found the game fun, or why they thought other people found the game fun. We had a big conversation. At the end of it, a big email conversation. At the end of it, after several months, I summarised the results, found that generally there were 4 categories, things that people found to be fun. And when I wrote the paper, when I wrote it up, I wasn't saying these are the 4 things that people find fun. I was saying, look, people find different things fun. Here, for example, are 4 different things that people find fun in MMOs, or MUDs as they were called back then, multi-user dungeons. And I thought that pretty soon people would come along and look at that and think, well, what nonsense, particularly psychologists, because they have a lot more understanding of why people do what they were doing. And then they'd replace it with a better system, and then we get better games. And since all I want is better games, then that's fine by me. I was prepared to put my head up over the parapet. The main reason I was doing it was to say, look, people play games for different reasons. Turned out, however, that my first attempt, these 4 player types, was actually quite accurate. Big surprise to me, but hey. So that paper now, as it gets it's got over 2,000 citations. There's a couple of new ones every week, sometimes half a dozen, depends on the time of year, who's writing, whether people are writing reports or something. I've seen figures of up to 15,000 citations, but you can't trust those. Anyway, rather than this just going as self-aggrandizement, although I'm quite happy to do that, I'm going to try and explain what these 4 types are and how they might be relevant to people who want to use games to develop or to gain information from players which they can then use for some other purpose, in other words for GWAPS. So this is the classic diagram that I had, people like either acting or interacting on either the players of the game or the game world. Now that research was only about massively multiplayer online role-playing games, or back in the day MUDs. I do not claim that this works for anything else, because I've got no explanation as to why it would work for anything else. I have an explanation as to why it would work for MMOs, which you're welcome to look up if you have 2 hours extra in lockdown that you really want to spend doing anything other than watching the television or playing games. But that's not really the point here. The thing is that my player types model gets used all the time in game design, not just for MMOs, but for regular games, which I don't advocate, but I'm not going to stop people who do. I remember being quite surprised when I was an external examiner at Lincoln to find myself as the answer to an exam question, which is quite cool, but they weren't making MMOs there. Anyway, what I'm going to do then is use these different types, player types, Achiever, Explorer, Socializer and Killer, to illustrate the general principle that different people find different things fun. I'm not saying that these are the 4 things that people will find fun in your GWAP. I'm trying to show you that if you look at who's playing your GWAP from a particular direction, then it will give a particular result. My doorbell has just gone. Oh well, I think my wife's going to answer it. That's handy. The point I'm trying to make is that if you understand your players, you can widen the appeal of your game. If you know who's playing your game, then you can make the game appeal to those people. And if you know that they're playing for different reasons, not necessarily these reasons, but for different reasons which you can identify yourself, write a paper and get as many citations as you like from it, then that'll help your game, and it'll help games in general, which is why I'm in this. I just want better games. Now, when people play a game, there's a call loop. When people are playing a game, there's something that they do most of the time, over and over. They usually come in short beats. There'll be 2, sometimes 3 actions. So in tennis, what you do is you hit the ball, and then you move, and then you hit the ball, and then you move. You keep doing that until one of you misses, and that's the point, then you start again. In a first-person shooter computer game, you are moving and shooting, moving and shooting, moving and shooting, until someone shoots you. Then you're not moving. In poker, you've got the rounds where you're drawing, and then you're bidding, drawing and bidding, drawing. So this is the call loop there. In a language GWAP, what you're doing is you're reading a sentence or other text, and then you're making a judgment. So you're reading the content, making a judgment, reading the content, making a judgment. That's the call loop. Now we can assume for all our players that the call loop's going to be fun, because if it isn't fun, they'll just never engage with the game. They'll just never take part in it, because it's not of interest to them. Now, if you're doing a casual game, the kind of games people play on phones a lot, 5-10 minutes gameplay, core loops are all you need to sustain them. People will play for the core loop, and that's all you need. That's all they'll stop. And when they get bored, they'll stop and they'll come back to it later if they're interested again. So most people won't play these games for long, but you will attract more of them. So what this means is that from a GWAP point of view, if you want them to make judgments, you're not really got them for very long. So the kind of judgments you're going to get are going to be shallow at most. You won't have time to give them a tutorial or anything. They'll have gone by then because it's just a casual game with a core loop to it. Now, non-casual games, not quite hardcore, they'll have fewer players because most people aren't really gamers, but the players that they've got, they'll keep for longer. They'll have a higher retention, and from these you can get very sophisticated judgments. But the players got to be engaged at a higher level than just the core loop. You can't just keep giving them the same old things. You've got to have something above that to structure it, some proper actual full-on gameplay. Now this higher level is where the player types kick in, because when people are playing the game at the high level, that's when they're going to have different reasons for playing it, even though they all enjoy the same core loop. Right. Maybe I should have switched the mic off before I just drank that. Oh well. So, achievers. Some people will be playing your game in the spirit of the game, as a game. These are the people that they're playing it to try and win it, or at least to try and lose, try not to lose for as long as possible. We call these achievers. They're basically there trying to win, and their fun derives from the struggle that trying to win entails. They do want to win, but it's not just about the winning, it's about overcoming the obstacles on the way to winning. So the end goal is important, but so's the journey. The journey is as important, well, probably more important than the end goal. The end goal is just there to give a context to the journey and to feel really good when you're finished and you've got this completionist thing. So gameplay is all about making decisions. You're presented with some options. Some things say it's good, some things say it's not so good. So this, you might say, oh, this is really good, but it's risky. Or I really want to do this and I really want to do that, which is better? So you've got different goals or different strategies pulling you in different directions, and gameplay is about these decisions, these meaningful decisions. Sid Meier's, designer of Civilization, famously quoted gameplay as a series of interesting decisions. So achievers want to chart a course through these meaningful decisions to get to the end goal, and that's the gameplay. Now, if you give achievers rewards, the rewards have to be meaningful. If you shower them with rewards for everything that they do, eventually the rewards become meaningless. You might be able to persuade new players to hang around for a bit. Hang around for a bit longer by giving them fresh new things to look at, but eventually they'll run out of things. You'll run out of things to look at to give them to keep their interest, and they'll go. So showering them with rewards is not effective unless it's for things that actually deserve rewards, not for minor things. Oh, well done, here. Have a polo mint. It doesn't satisfy achievers because it's demeaning their achievements. It's like, oh, well done, you managed to beat the boss here, well done, here, have one of these. Yeah, it's quite patronising. They felt the reward in the beating the boss and beating the end of this particular stretch of content. There'll be some puzzle or some monster or something that they've got to defeat or overcome in some way, and they got their entertainment from achieving that. Yeah, you can highlight it a bit by music or some other effect in order to show them that yes, you have actually reached the end of this, and here's a little piece to give you some apotheosis. But if you just keep giving it for every minor thing that they do, well, that really undermines their achievement. Well, not so much undermines, it demeans it. It makes it feel less worthwhile. What achievers like is when the games have got some rules telling them to do one thing and some rules telling them to do another thing, and these things need to be balanced, and deciding which way to go. Those are features, and when they've got multiple features, so should I be investing in my army, or should I be investing in my economy, or should I be investing in exploring? All these different things where you've got multiple decisions that are acting against each other, and then at a higher level where you're trying to decide which of the possible different demands on your limited resources you should be following. This is what achievers like. They can also like simpler things like managing to construct something that's very difficult to construct, which isn't necessarily to do with the game players, to do with their own performance. But anyway, what they like is having challenges that they can overcome, and it's fun in the overcoming of them. So anything that makes their decisions important is something that achievers like. Now, if we were translating this into a GWAP context, then if you want to appeal to achievers, you should present them with interesting decisions to make. None of these decisions should be easy. They don't even necessarily have to be solved already, but they should be interesting for the achiever to tackle. They shouldn't just be obvious answers. Or if they are obvious answers, then the achiever should have deliberately gone to get the obvious answer because they wanted to feel better or something. In World of Warcraft, there was a character called Hogger, a non-player character, who used to beat up my character every time I passed by when I was a very low level. He was like level 9 and would beat me up every single time I passed. Occasionally, when I got to levels 60, 70, 80, I would go around and beat Hogger because he had it coming. Because I could beat him then. It was just easy. I just snap my fingers and the guy goes dead. Ha ha. Likewise, sometimes if people, they like interesting decisions, but they do like to be able to go back and do the easy stuff as well. Just so they think, oh, remember the days when I thought that was hard. So if you give, if you want to help achievers or to attract achievers or to keep achievers who you have attracted, you need to give them ways to advance to new problems that they've not dealt with before, that are harder than they've dealt with before, or that are completely new ways of have to develop new strategies for dealing with them. The formulating strategies to get through this progression is what achievers will find fun, and in games most players will be achievers. In your GWAPS most players probably will be achievers. They'll want to do well. They'll look to the next goal and be trying to achieve that next goal. Right, so that's achievers. Explorers. These are people who find the game's inbuilt systems fun. And what they're playing is because they want to understand how your game works. This can be at a superficial level, or it can be at a deeper level, or it can be at both. If your game is about language use, then this could be, the explorers could be meaning to explore how language works, or they could just be exploring how the gameplay works that's supporting the language analysis. Explorers are really good at spotting bugs and any other weaknesses. This is in the game and in the content, so not just will they find bugs in the game itself, how it's programmed, or the interface, or any of those things. Not just in the way that it's works as a system. So they might find, oh, I can get to this content here that I'm not supposed to be doing by doing these things here, and now I've got access to something I shouldn't have. They'll find those kind of logic bugs as well, but they'll also be able to find bugs in language. Or whatever you're doing your GWAP about, they'll be able to say, well, hold on just a moment, this looks as though it should be like this, but it's not, it's like this, and there doesn't seem to be a way of referencing that, or maybe there are two ways and they're both equally plausible. They'll be able to find things like that as well, so they're very useful as explorers. The way to think of them is your game is like a barrel made of wood, and you've tried to stop it up, put tar on the inside, trying to stop up so nothing's going to leak out of it. Explorers are water. You pour the water into the barrels. If there's a leak, they're going to find it. They're going to come out and they'll discover all the cracks. So this is what explorers can do for your game, so they're pretty good. Generally, they're going to make very good judgments because they're there to understand the systems. The systems are all about the task, and the task is about judgments, so they're going to make good judgments. However, sometimes they will make marginal judgments or bad judgments, just flat out incorrect judgments, just to see what will happen. They're not doing it to be bad, they're doing it out of curiosity. They are exploring the search space, and in so doing will sometimes do things that they know are wrong just to see what happens. So you can't always rely on what they say. They're not trying to win for the sake of winning. For them, winning, attaining some goal is just obtaining the key that they need to unlock the next level of content. So after they've done something to death, then they might think, okay, I'll go on and have a look at the next thing, and that involves doing something that an achiever would be aiming to do from the start. They'll do it towards the end, just to unlock it so they get to the next thing to explore. Now, in a GWAP context, explorers will notice some of the things that you might want to do. When you're trying to trick the players, explorers are the ones who will not be tricked. So if you're trying to make them think that they're playing a multiplayer game against a human opponent, and the opponent is not human, it's an AI, or it's just random numbers or something, or it's a recording of a human player, something like that, they will notice, and they will tell people. They'll tell you, they'll tell people, everybody else, and your whole pretense will have gone. They will notice if you reward them for making judgments which you don't yet know are correct or not. So if you say, here's a sentence, analyse all the chains of pronoun use, or analyse all the noun phrases, or whatever you're telling them to do. If you do that, if they do that, and then you give them a reward, they will notice if you reward them for doing something wrong. Achievers wouldn't necessarily notice that, or they wouldn't care, and if they did notice it, then they'd just suddenly start doing it the whole time. Explorers won't do it the whole time, but they will notice it and they will tell people. They'll also notice it if you're doing consistency checks, where you ask them something and then a bit later on when they've scrolled past and can't go back to find out what they said the first time, you ask them again to see whether they're being consistent or whether they're just hitting buttons at random. They'll notice Will Explorers and they'll tell you and they'll complain about it. You just say, yeah, okay, fair cop, that's what we're doing and this is why we're doing it. Well done for noticing it. They do like being told well done for noticing things. On the whole, Explorers are good to have, very good to have, but they're very likely to be rare unless your game happens to attract lots of researchers, because researchers tend to have an explorer nature to them. And if your game doesn't have many players, but the ones it does have are mainly researchers, other people, other linguists and so on, then you could have a lot of explorers and you could get some very high quality judgments out of them. Right, next up, socializers. Socializers use the game as a context to interact with other people who've got the same interests as them. They're not really worried about winning or losing. Achievers really like to have socializers around because, okay, so imagine that you're an achiever. You want to be the top. I don't even know if this is in the screen because I don't know what I can see, but anyway, here you go. So you want to be in the top, and that means that if you're at the bottom, then you're going to stop playing. And then other people who were previously not at the bottom are now at the bottom, and they're going to stop playing. And eventually it kind of frays away until you've only got this hardcore of players at the top. But if you've got achievers and a layer of people underneath them who don't actually care about achievements, then that means all the achievers have got someone they can be better than. So they're never quite at the bottom themselves. There's always someone who's lower down. So that's like a hem that stops it from fraying. So socializers and achievers go quite well together, in that socializers help the achievers to stay. Now, if you give them things that is going to cause for conversation, they will love it. So if you're giving them anything that's ambiguous, they will just talk to other players about it, ask them what they think, say what they think, and summarize them all, and then discuss what other people think, and then maybe talk about other things like, well, I was going to say the football, but generally probably not the football at the moment. It's probably going to be how are you not dead yet? Anyway, this is only possible if you give them the tools to do so. If there's no way to interact with other people, then obviously they can't do it, and so they're gone. They tend to prefer cooperative play or solo play if there's somewhere that they can talk about it afterwards to other people. Competitive play they don't really like, because that's more, competitiveness is more of an achiever thing. Now, this can be good because if they do talk about some ambiguity or some problem, then it can lead to a pretty definitive answer, because they'll have discussed it among themselves and reached a consensus. But it can also be bad, because they'll spend a lot of time discussing, which they could have been spending making judgments, but they're spending it discussing things that have already been decided. They'll recommend to each other texts or other content that's already been annotated or judged upon, or things that are easy reads. They'll recommend them for the wrong reasons. And they may not wish to move on. They may like the kind of level of content that they're doing, which from your perspective could be not particularly interesting. You'd much rather they were moving on to more sophisticated content where they have to make higher level judgments, but they can be quite happy where they are, and you're not going to be able to induce them to move to the other area by means of rewards or by means of adding extra content, because what's making them hang around is the presence of other players. So it can be a little bad, not so much bad as frustrating. You can be getting not as much work out of them, to put it cynically, as you would do an achiever, say. If you design it right, a GWAP could attract a large number of socializers. It depends on the topic, but a GWAP could pick up quite a lot. For the massively multiplayer games which this system was developed for, there are some which are 70% socializers. Although most people start out, they'll be playing for achiever reasons, but in the end they'll be playing for socializer reasons. Right, the fourth category, killers, and these players get their fun from stopping other people from having fun. So your griefers, your trolls, these are the killers. You get them in the game whether you want them or not, and you probably don't want them. Now MMOs need them a certain amount to add drama, because if nothing's there to add drama, well, the game becomes bland. GWAPs almost certainly don't want any, but they're very hard to discourage. Socializers in particular, it's really easy to press their buttons, and killers can go in and press the buttons of a few socializers and cause damage out of all proportion to their numbers. If you let it carry on, the socializer will start thinking your community is toxic, and then they'll leave. And why not? It would be toxic. So you probably want to get rid of their trolls, and of griefers and other bullies and so on. This is some kind of pear flavoured, I don't know. It was the only stuff they had in the shop. So MMOs need them for drama. The analogy that I would give for an MMO would be, you're eating your food and you think, this food's not really all that great, I'll put some pepper on it, and now it tastes better. So the pepper is like the killers. You want a little bit, but you don't want the whole pot. For GWAPs, because they're not MMOs, because they don't need the drama, and they've got the equivalent of drama with the discussion for ambiguities if it's a linguistic GWAP. So they don't need the killers, so you don't want them. Now, your main objective with killers is identifying them. You want to identify them so you can ignore their contributions, because not only do they want to stop other people from having fun, they want to stop you from having fun. They want to know that they have ruined your day by providing a whole bunch of bad judgments which are now stored in your database forever. So you want to be able to ignore their contributions, and you also want to banish them. If you've got many players, then some of them may reform, and the ones that reform tend to be quite good. They end up being like explorers, but you don't. You're going to lose more players on the process to that than you're going to get good players from the ones who reform. One way to do that, and there are many ways, one way to do that is honey traps. So you put in some mechanics that no regular player would do, except maybe an explorer once, but that would attract the deviant players. Deviant is the word that academics use to describe them. So you put mechanics that would attempt them to do something bad, that a regular player wouldn't do anything bad. And once they fall into the honey trap, then you can look at their judgments and see if they've been generally giving good or bad things. You can see what the effects they're doing to the other players, and then if they turn out to be a killer, then you ban them. There's always going to be people who spoil other people's fun for fun. In GWAPs, they may also spoil your research for fun. So you do really want to sort them out. Now, what I've just described here, player types, it's only the warranty on it's only good for MMOs. It's I will defend why it works for MMOs, but I won't defend why it works for anything else, because I don't claim that it does. Plenty of people use it for other things, but that's not necessarily the right approach. It might be like, I provided a screw and a screwdriver, but you've only got a hammer, so you're using the screw like it's a nail. Okay, well that's better than using your fingers, but really you need the screwdriver. So you can use it, and people do use it profitably, but if it doesn't work for you, you can't blame me. What I'm trying to tell you here is that there are people playing for different reasons, not that these are the reasons. So for your particular GWAP, your particular players, these may not be an appropriate lens, or one or two of them might be, but not all of them. But the point of bringing them up is to show that people do play games for different reasons. They don't all play for the same reason, and that same reason is definitely not the same reason that you would be playing the game. They play for different reasons. If you're an inexperienced designer, it's really easy to think that your players are going to think how you think, because that's your only experience of thinking how players think is how you think. Even if you know that they like different things, you might still look at it through the wrong lens. You might, well, here's an example. Consider a designer who is thinking like an achiever. They know they're supposed to be designing for games for players of other types, and they know what those types are, but they themselves are not meta enough. They themselves are thinking like one type, an achiever, say. So what they would do is they reward achievers, or people who are doing achievement activities, with badges. They give them titles. When they reach a particular gameplay milestone, then they'll give them some reward that's meaningful in the game context. This is usually fine. If they do it too much, then it can be self-defeating. If you start giving extrinsic rewards to people who for tacitly find intrinsically interesting, then they lose their intrinsic interest. If you look up over-justification effect, that'll explain it. However, they'll also do the same sort of things for explorers. Because if you think that people like rewards, and you want to encourage an explorer to explore, then you think, well, in that case, I shall give the explorer a reward for exploring. If you look at a wide range of texts, then you get a badge, maybe. Or if you do a wide range of judgments, then you get a title. Now, their heart's in the right place here. They know that there are explorers, and they know that they want to reward explorers, but they're thinking like achievers. So the rewards they're giving them are the wrong kind. They're achievement rewards for explorers. For explorers, the reward is in finding new things. It's not getting a pat on the back for it, it's finding it. So if you want to reward an explorer, you reward an explorer by giving them access to new content or anything else that's new to explore, new things for them to look at and find out how they work. That's what explorers want. Likewise, if you're an achiever and you want to, and you're a designer, and you're trying to reward people for socializers, to stop your socializers going, the achievement way of thinking would be to reward them for the number of communications they give, or for the length of communications they give, or for the number of people with whom they communicate, things like that. That's not what socializers want. They don't care about those rewards. What they want is high quality interactions with interesting people. that's what you need to try and give them. If you start giving them badges for communications, well, that's of no interest to the explorers, but what it is of interest to is to achievers. The achievers will then go out and try and get every badge that they can by faking being being socializers. Yes, delete that earlier explorers, I think I said, maybe I didn't, and replace it with socializers. Yeah, okay, done, right. So what you'd happen there is that you get the communication channels that explorers, socializers are using, would be overwhelmed by messages from achievers to each other, which are completely vacuous. They're just doing it to get the number counts up so that they then get the reward and then they can go away. Same thing happens if you give explorer rewards. They give achiever reward to explorers. The achievers will go off and do all these things, stand in these particular points and look around, and you get the special badge, get the experience points. Well, maybe you will, but explorers aren't interested in those. They're interested in having new places, not interested in having rewards for done some kind of jump puzzle to get to a new place. For killers, the thinking goes the other way. So, well, we don't want killers, so what we'll do is we'll withhold their rewards. We won't give them things. You've been a bad person, so we're not going to give you the special badge that you would have gotten normally at this point. But killers love that because it shows that you care. They see it as proof that they are hurting you. So that if you don't give them the same rewards as everybody else, then they know that they're having an impact. So you can't use achiever thinking to deal with killers. And the same applies to socializer thinking, explorer thinking, and even killer thinking, or such as it is. Now, there are plenty of other issues that GWAP designers face that are nothing to do with player types. As I mentioned earlier, it's quite hard to respond to players' actions if we don't know whether their actions should be rewarded or not just yet. We need to introduce players to both how the games work and how the content works. So normally, if you're if you're reading a book, you'll just need some context setting. If you're playing a game, you need the context, and you'll also need this is how the controls work, and this is a basic tutorial of how to play the game. If you're doing a GWAP, you need those two things and this is how you analyse the content. This is how you make a judgment. So that's three things that have got to be introduced all at the beginning, and that's quite a hurdle for new players to have to get over. Today's players don't like reading instructions. It used to be that you get games and have a nice thick manual, and the thicker the manual the better the game, but nowadays players don't like that. They just like to wing it. So it makes it even harder. You can't say, read this text, it tells you how to play. Maybe I'll just play something where I don't have to do that. Well, on the one hand, if the game's all about reading text, then perhaps it's good to get rid of those people. But on the other hand, if they're used to it, if they're up for playing a game, they actually want to play the game. They don't want to play reading instructions first. And the other thing is that what players want to read or to listen to or otherwise engage in language may not be what you want them to read. They might have different ideas, and trying to persuade them that, oh, it would be really interesting if you were to look at this here, over here, look, it's good, and they're only interested in Agatha Christie, well, what can you do? They're not insurmountable, but they are things that you need to recognise up front and try to design around them. So, conclusion. GWAPs lie somewhere between serious games and commercial games, and Designers probably won't be interested in designing them for fun, but they could be interested in designing them as an intellectual exercise. You could also have a go at designing them yourselves if you're not a designer, but if you do, try not to design the game that you would yourself find fun. If the core loop isn't fun, the rest of the gameplay is going to be irrelevant, and if it is fun, the rest of the game is going to be fun to different people for different reasons. And the more of those reasons you can think of, and the more of those reasons you can address, the better. A final point. Even the best game designers aren't actually all that good at game design. They're just much better than you are. If you spot a game design issue, just say so. Say to the designer, look, you've designed this, but this doesn't seem right. This seems like there's something odd here. You could actually be right. The designer's not perfect. They will have made mistakes. If you find them, point them out. However, if the designer, when you press them on these issues, can't say why things have to be the way they are, just that they have to be the way they are, then you should indulge them, because at this point here, your designer's gone from being a designer of games to a game designer. That means they're into the art, not the craft. And what you'll get at the end of that will be a far better game than if you just let them indulge their craft, let them indulge their art. Okay, that's it. Now to find out if I've just been speaking for ages and not recorded any of it. If you're interested in contacting me about this, rabartle@essex.act.uk should get it. And I better close this down, because now you'll see my embarrassingly messy worktop.